Hey everyone, and welcome back. We're diving into a topic that's going to be particularly useful for our listeners getting ready for the UPSC exams.
Especially those of you who are focusing on international relations.
Exactly.
Yeah,
We're going to be talking about the need for reform in global economic governance.
big topic.
Huge topic, and it's something that's been debated a lot, especially since
Yeah,
that 2007-2009 financial crisis.
absolutely.
So consider this like your cheat sheet to understanding this really complex issue
Yeah,
that has real-world implications for everybody.
absolutely. So we're looking at an excerpt here that kind of lays out why reform is needed
Okay.
and the different kind of perspectives on how to go about it.
Perfect. So the current system of global economic governance,
Right.
it's not like brand new, is it?
No, it's not.
It was established after World War II
Yeah,
in response to the Great Depression in the 1930s.
yeah,
But here's the thing. Despite these institutions we have in place,
yeah.
financial crises haven't disappeared.
No, they haven't, unfortunately.
They seem to be happening more frequently
Yeah,
and with like increasing intensity,
they are.
especially since the 1980s.
It seems like every decade or so there's another one.
Yeah.
The Asian financial crisis in the late 90s, the dot-com bubble
Right.
bursting in the early 2000s,
Yeah.
shook people's confidence in
Yeah.
the system's ability to kind of prevent
Right.
or even mitigate these shocks.
And even before these crises happened,
Yes.
some thinkers were already warning
Yeah.
about
Yeah.
this like kind of inherent instability of a globalized financial system.
Yeah.
Thinkers like Susan Strange.
Yeah, Susan Strange is great.
She coined the term casino capitalism
She did.
to describe the dangers of these unregulated flows of global capital.
Yeah. So what she was getting at with that term is that all of the speculation
Yeah.
and the flow of this, what she called mad money,
Okay.
right, inevitably leads to asset bubbles and then, of course, devastating crashes.
Right.
And we saw that.
Yeah.
That's not just theory. That's what happened.
Yeah.
Think about the subprime mortgage crisis.
Right. Yeah.
That triggered the 2007 meltdown.
Exactly.
That's casino capitalism in action.
But if thinkers like Susan Strange
Right.
were already like ringing the alarm bells,
Yeah.
why was the world sleeping?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of reasons.
Yeah.
One reason is that leading up to the 2007 crisis, the global economy was actually experiencing a period of relative stability and growth.
Okay.
So when things are going well,
Yeah.
there's less incentive to rock the boat.
If it ain't broke, don't fix it, kind of.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And plus the crises that did happen before 2007, like
Yeah.
the Asian financial crisis,
Mhm.
were seen as regional issues
Okay.
impacting emerging economies.
Right.
The core developed countries were relatively insulated.
Yeah.
So there wasn't a sense of urgency
Yeah.
for systemic reform.
Yeah. And then 2007, 2009,
Yeah.
like you said earlier, complete game changer.
Yeah. It wasn't just a regional blip.
Okay.
This was a global meltdown.
Yeah.
The worst economic downturn
Right.
since the Great Depression.
Yeah.
And it originated in the heart of global finance, the United States.
Right. So this wasn't
Yeah.
some far off problem.
No, it was a crisis of the core of the system.
Yeah.
Stock markets plummeted worldwide, banks teetered on the brink of collapse.
Yeah.
And, economies across the globe went into free fall.
Yeah.
It's a real wake-up call.
Huge wake up call.
Yeah, and it forced everyone to really confront the need
Yeah.
to reform global economic governance.
And I think that's where the calls for a new Bretton Woods come in.
Exactly.
What would that look like?
Right. Well, that's the big question, isn't it?
Yeah. Is there like a single blueprint?
Not really.
Yeah.
For reform.
There's a whole spectrum of opinions on this, on how to go about reforming global economic governance.
Break it down for us. What are the main schools of thought?
All right. Well, you have the market fundamentalists.
Okay. And they believe in minimal government intervention. They
Right.
argue that the market's self-correcting
Yeah.
and that crises are an unavoidable part of the economic cycle.
Right.
So to them, the best solution is to let the market work its magic.
Okay. So a very hands-off approach.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. But as you can imagine,
Yeah.
that's a view that not everyone shares.
Especially after 2008.
Exactly. Yeah.
Seems a little like the fox guarding the henhouse, maybe.
Yeah. Well, that's what the next group would say.
Okay.
The regulatory liberals.
Okay.
They argue for a more interventionist approach.
All right.
Their focus is on strengthening financial regulations,
Okay.
both domestically and internationally,
Mm-hmm.
to prevent excessive risk-taking and to curb
Yeah.
these kind of speculative bubbles that
Yeah.
lead to meltdowns.
So more rules, more oversight.
Yeah, more oversight.
It seems like a direct response to that casino capitalism.
Exactly. Yeah.
Mhm.
And then you have the cosmopolitan liberals,
Okay.
and they go a step further. They argue that tinkering with regulations isn't enough.
Okay.
They envision a much more radical transformation of
Okay.
global governance based on the concept of cosmopolitan democracy.
All right, so more democratic.
Yes, much more democratic.
More inclusive
Yeah,
global system.
that's right.
So we've got hands off, we've got more rules,
Yeah,
and we've got a more democratic global system.
that's right.
What else is there?
Well, you can't forget the anti-capitalists.
Oh, right, of course.
Right.
Yeah.
They see these recurring crises as evidence of the flaws
Yeah.
of capitalism itself.
Okay.
And they argue that true reform requires a fundamental redistribution
Yeah.
of wealth and power on a global scale.
So this isn't just a financial hiccup to them.
No, it's much more fundamental than that.
It's like a systemic failure.
Exactly. That's right.
Oh.
So understanding these different perspectives is really crucial
It is.
for anyone trying to make sense of this whole debate.
Absolutely. So we've got all these calls for reform, but has there been any real tangible change?
That's a good question.
What's the progress been like?
Well, it's a little tricky.
Okay.
There was a lot of activity after the 2007-2009 crisis.
Okay.
You know, the G20,
Yeah.
which initially took the lead in the global response.
Mhm.
They implemented some measures like bank bailouts and stimulus packages.
But it sounds like those were more like
Yeah.
Band-Aid solutions.
Yeah, you could say that.
Not a real like systemic
Not a complete overhaul.
overhaul. Yeah.
No. And there are a couple of key reasons why more hasn't been done.
Okay.
The first is those initial G20 interventions.
Yeah.
They did have some success in stabilizing the global economy.
Right.
And so as things calmed down,
Yeah.
the sense of urgency for drastic reform faded.
Out of sight, out of mind, maybe?
You could say that, yeah, but then there's another factor
Okay.
that's even more significant, and that's the shifting global power dynamics.
Okay.
The U.S., which traditionally held a dominant position in
Yeah.
global economic institutions, is no longer the sole superpower calling the shots.
So we're talking about the rise of new economic powerhouses.
Exactly.
The BRICS.
The BRICS countries, yeah, Brazil,
Mhm.
Russia, India, China, and sometimes South Africa.
Right.
They're demanding a greater voice
Okay.
in shaping the rules of the global economy.
Right.
So any reform efforts now require a lot more negotiation,
Mhm.
compromise, and consensus building.
Yeah.
It's a slower, more complex process,
Okay.
but it reflects the reality of a more multipolar world.
So we've got a more fragmented global landscape.
Yeah.
It sounds like a lack of consensus
It can be tough to get everyone on the same page.
on how to move forward, and then this inertia of the existing system,
Right.
which is understandable. Nobody really likes change that much.
It's hard to change a system as big and complex as the global economy.
Yeah, so this paints a pretty challenging picture
Yeah, it does.
for people hoping for rapid and radical reform.
It's going to be a long process.
But despite these obstacles,
Yeah.
there have been some concrete developments, right?
There have been.
Tell us about the Financial Stability Board, the FSB.
All right, so the FSB was established in 2009,
Okay.
and it's often seen as a potential fourth pillar
Fourth pillar. Okay.
of global economic governance,
Okay.
alongside the IMF, the World Bank,
Right.
and the WTO.
Okay.
So its mandate is to coordinate the work of national financial authorities
Okay.
and international standard-setting bodies.
All right. So it's like a global watchdog
You could say that, yeah.
for the financial system.
They're tasked with monitoring risks, identifying vulnerabilities,
They did?
and promoting best practices.
So it's all about setting standards and coordinating policies.
Exactly.
But does it have any teeth?
That's a great question.
Can it punish countries that don't comply?
Well, that's where things get a little tricky.
Okay.
The FSB doesn't have direct enforcement powers.
Okay.
It relies on peer pressure, moral suasion,
Okay.
and the threat of reputational damage
Interesting.
to encourage compliance.
So whether that's enough to effectively regulate
Oh.
this really complex and interconnected global financial system
Right.
is debatable.
It is. It's an ongoing debate.
And we've talked about these shifting global power dynamics.
Yes.
But the FSB doesn't really seem to reflect that new reality.
You're right, does it? One of the major criticisms of the FSB
Okay.
is its lack of representation from developing countries.
Yeah.
It includes some major emerging economies, but a large portion
Okay.
of the global south is still excluded.
From the decision-making processes.
Yes.
So while it might represent a step towards greater coordination and oversight,
Yeah.
it's still very much a work in progress.
Yeah.
And it needs to be more inclusive,
Yes.
more representative,
Absolutely.
if it's going to effectively address these 21st century challenges.
It needs to evolve along with the global economy.
Yeah, the FSB, like this whole project of reforming global economic governance,
Yeah.
it's an evolving process.
It is. It's about finding ways to manage a complex system in a way that is stable and equitable.
So much to think about. We've covered a lot of ground,
We have.
from the history of global economic governance
Yeah.
to the challenges of reform in a multipolar world.
Absolutely.
And we're not done yet.
No, we're not.
So stay tuned for part 2.
Yeah. We'll be right back after a short break.
We'll be back after a short break.
Welcome back, everyone. So before the break, we were talking about those limitations of existing institutions like the FSB and the need for this more inclusive approach
Yeah.
to global economic governance.
Right. And we can't really talk about inclusivity without talking about
Right.
the elephant in the room, which is these rising economic powerhouses,
Yeah.
especially the BRICS nations.
Yeah. The BRICS are a really interesting case.
They are.
You know, they're challenging that old guard.
Yeah.
They're demanding a seat at the table
Right.
where the rules of the global economy are written.
Yeah, the emergence of the BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China,
Yeah.
and sometimes South Africa, it's a defining feature
Absolutely.
of the 21st century
Yeah.
global landscape.
They're not just economic players either.
Right.
They're increasingly assertive on the geopolitical stage,
Yeah.
and that has huge implications for how global economic governance evolves.
So we've got these rising powers challenging
Yeah.
this established order.
Yeah.
What does this mean for the future of global economic governance?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah. Are we headed towards a more fragmented system
Yeah.
with competing blocks? Or is there a chance for a more
Yeah.
cooperative and multipolar world?
Well, some analysts would say that the rise of the BRICS
Yeah.
will lead to greater fragmentation,
Okay.
a decline in cooperation, a rise in geopolitical competition,
Right.
and they point to the creation of new institutions,
Okay.
like the BRICS New Development Bank,
Right.
as evidence of this kind of move away
Okay.
from that existing Western-dominated system.
A shift in power.
Yeah.
A move towards alternative institutions.
Yeah.
Sounds a little unstable.
It could be, but then again, it could also be an opportunity
Right.
to create a more balanced
Yeah.
and representative system.
Okay.
Right? If these emerging economies have a greater say
Right.
in shaping the rules of the game, they might be more invested
Right.
in making the system work.
It's like if you're excluded from the decision-making,
Exactly.
why would you care
Yeah, why would you care?
about upholding the rules?
Exactly. But if you're a stakeholder,
Right.
you're more likely to work towards a system
Yeah.
that benefits everyone.
Benefits everyone, right?
Right. So greater inclusion could lead to a more stable
Okay.
and a more equitable global economic order.
More stable and equitable.
Yeah. But of course,
Yeah.
this assumes that there's a willingness to compromise and cooperate.
Yeah. And as we've seen, that's not always a given.
It's not.
Is it?
No, it's definitely not a guarantee.
So let's say hypothetically
Okay.
that these established powers and these emerging powers,
Yeah.
they can find some common ground.
Yeah.
Are the existing institutions, the IMF, the World Bank,
Right?
the WTO, are they capable of adapting
Yeah.
to a multipolar world?
That's another big question.
Or do we need to completely rethink
Yeah.
global governance?
Some would say we need entirely new models.
Yeah.
Right. Critics would argue that these existing institutions
Yeah.
are inherently biased towards the interests of developed countries.
Right.
They point to voting structures that give a lot of power
Yeah.
to Western nations and policies that often favor
Yeah.
the needs of advanced economies.
So it sounds like people are saying
Yeah.
that these institutions are kind of relics of a bygone era.
Yeah, a time when the West
Yeah.
held undisputed dominance.
Can they be reformed, or do we need to just like scrap it
Yeah, that's a big debate.
and start over?
You know, some argue for a complete overhaul,
Okay.
a Bretton Woods two-set,
A Bretton Woods two said it.
right? Designed for the 21st century. Others believe that reforming existing institutions
Okay.
is a more pragmatic approach.
So like reforming the IMF.
Yeah, you know, focusing on things like quota reform
Okay.
to give developing countries more voting power and adjusting policies
Right.
to better reflect the needs of a more diverse global economy.
So reform or revolution?
Yeah, those are kind of the two big options.
Reform, we tweak the existing system.
Yeah.
Revolution, we tear it down and start over.
Right. But those aren't the only options. There are other models and institutions emerging that could play a role in reshaping global economic governance.
Give us some examples.
Well, one development that's worth watching
Okay.
is the growing importance of regional and interregional organizations.
Like what?
So think about groups like ASEAN,
Okay.
the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, the African Union, or Morocco's in South America.
Okay.
These regional blocs are becoming more and more important in the global economy.
So rather than just relying on those big global institutions,
Yeah.
we're seeing more action happening at the regional level.
Yeah, kind of a shift from a top-down to a more bottom-up approach.
So that makes sense.
Yeah.
Because global institutions can sometimes seem very distant.
They can.
And out of touch with what's happening on the ground.
Absolutely. And regional organizations can be more agile and responsive to the specific needs and priorities of their members.
Right, because they're closer.
They're closer to the ground. Exactly.
But could this emphasis on regionalism lead to even more fragmentation?
Yeah, it's a good question.
Like, wouldn't that undermine efforts to create a more unified global economic order?
It's a legitimate concern.
Yeah.
But, there's also the possibility that these regional blocs could actually become the building blocks for a more effective and equitable global system, right? They could serve as a bridge between those national interests and global cooperation. Finding solutions that work both locally and globally.
So instead of viewing regionalism as a threat to global governance, we could see it as a potential pathway.
Exactly.
To a more inclusive...
To a more multi-layered
system.
Yeah.
Okay, so much to think about.
There is.
We've covered a lot of ground again.
Yeah.
From the historical context of global economic governance to the challenges of reform in this multipolar world.
Yeah.
Limitations of existing institutions. The potential of new models.
Yeah.
Regionalism.
Absolutely.
I'm sure our UPSC aspirants are already feeling much more prepared.
I hope so.
To tackle this topic in their exams.
Yeah.
But before we move on to the final part of our deep dive, I think it's important to highlight how this theoretical knowledge can be translated into more practical insights.
Exactly.
For those preparing for the UPSC.
Yeah, it's not just about memorizing facts and figures. It's about developing those analytical skills to really understand these complex issues and to articulate informed opinions.
Okay, so how can our listeners use this knowledge to their advantage in the exam?
Well, first, they need to understand the historical evolution of the current system.
Yeah.
Why was it created in the first place?
Right.
What are its strengths and weaknesses?
Okay.
What were the key factors that led to the 2007-2009 crisis?
So it's about grasping that historical context.
Exactly.
To understand why reform is even necessary.
Right. And then they need to be able to analyze the present. And anticipate the future.
Right.
They should be able to identify the key players in the global economy, their interests, and how they're likely to influence the future of global governance.
Right.
They need to understand the different proposals for reform, the arguments for and against them, the potential challenges and opportunities.
Right. So it's really about connecting the dots.
It is.
Seeing how all these pieces fit together.
Exactly.
To form a bigger picture.
Yeah.
And it's not just about passively absorbing information.
Right.
It's about developing the skills to be able to think critically.
Yeah. You need to be able to evaluate those different perspectives and form your own informed opinions.
So it sounds like the UPSC is looking for more than just textbook knowledge.
Yeah, they want thinkers.
They want thinkers.
People who can analyze information and form their own conclusions.
Right. So understanding these global trends and the debates around them becomes so valuable.
It does.
Because it equips you with the knowledge and the tools to engage with complex issues in a meaningful way.
And that's really what it's all about.
Okay, so we've emphasized this historical context, the different perspectives on reform, the key players involved.
Right.
But what about the institutions themselves?
Yeah, the institutions are key.
The IMF, the World Bank, the WTO, the FSB. They all seem to play this crucial role.
They do. They're the ones who set the rules.
In shaping this global economic landscape.
Exactly. So understanding how those institutions work is essential.
What are their mandates? What are their strengths?
Yeah.
What are their weaknesses? What are the criticisms against them?
Exactly.
And what are the prospects for reform?
Yeah, those are all key questions.
It sounds like a lot to take in.
It is. It's a complex topic.
It is, but it's so fascinating.
It is.
And relevant.
And it affects all of us.
Especially for those who aspire to be
Yeah.
diplomats, policymakers, or even just like informed citizens.
Absolutely, because the future of global economic governance, it's not just some abstract concept.
It's not.
It affects our lives in so many ways.
So many ways.
Right, and by understanding how it works, by engaging in these debates, by holding our leaders accountable, we can all play a role in shaping a more just and sustainable global economic system.
It's a powerful message.
It is.
It reminds us that we're not just passive observers.
Right.
We can be active participants.
We can shape the future.
In shaping the world we want to live in.
Exactly. And on that note, I think it's time to move on to the final part.
The final part.
Of our deep dive.
All right. Okay, so we're back for the last part of our deep dive into reforming global economic governance.
It has been a fascinating discussion.
It really has. We've covered so much.
Yeah, from the historical context to the rise of new economic powers.
The limitations of what we have right now?
The potential of new models.
Regionalism, all that stuff.
So hopefully our listeners are starting to see how all these pieces fit together.
Yeah, because the global economy isn't just this abstract thing.
No, it's not.
It's a system that impacts everyone.
And understanding how it's governed is crucial.
It really is. So before we wrap up, let's try to distill everything into like some key takeaways.
Some essential nuggets of knowledge.
The stuff that our listeners should walk away with.
Yeah, where do we even begin?
I think the first takeaway has got to be that the 2007-2009 global financial crisis was a major turning point.
A watershed moment.
It wasn't just another recession or downturn.
Right. It exposed those flaws in the existing system.
And it forced the world to really confront the need for reform.
Yeah, it was a wake-up call.
Huge wake-up call.
For the entire globe.
It shattered this illusion that things were working for everybody.
It wasn't sustainable.
But finding a path to meaningful reform is really hard.
It's not, there's so many perspectives, so many competing interests.
Right.
And no easy answers.
And that leads right into our second key takeaway.
Okay.
Which is the diversity of perspectives.
Yes. There are so many different viewpoints on reform.
We talk about market fundamentalists.
Regulatory liberals, cosmopolitan liberals, anti-capitalists.
All these different groups.
And they all have different ideas about what the problem is.
And how to fix it.
Exactly. And understanding those different viewpoints.
Being able to like articulate their strengths and weaknesses is super important for making sense of this whole debate.
It's not about picking a side.
It's not.
It's about understanding the nuances.
And then we have to add in
the
shifting global power dynamics.
Right. We're not in a unipolar world anymore.
The rise of the BRICS.
Brazil, Russia, India, China.
It's reshaping everything.
Yeah, the geopolitical landscape is changing.
And that has huge implications.
Massive implications.
For global economic governance.
Absolutely. The old guard is being challenged.
Yeah.
And any reform is going to require negotiation. Consensus building.
Among a lot of different actors.
Yeah, it's a more complex process.
But it reflects this multipolar world.
It does.
So we've got this system that needs reform.
Yeah.
We've got all these opinions on how to do it.
Right.
And we've got this shifting global power balance.
Yeah.
It's a lot.
It's a lot to take in.
But for our UPSC aspirants out there, what should they be focusing on?
Well, first they need to understand the historical context.
Okay.
How did the system come about? What were its goals? What are its strengths and weaknesses?
So grasping the historical evolution to understand why reform is even necessary.
But they also need to analyze the present
Okay.
and anticipate the future.
Right.
So they should be able to identify those key players.
Those key players in the global economy.
Their interests, how they're going to influence the future of global governance.
So understanding those different proposals for reform.
Yeah.
The arguments, the challenges, the opportunities.
It's about connecting the dots.
Seeing the big picture.
Yeah. And it's not just about passively absorbing information.
Well, it's about developing those analytical skills.
You need to be able to think critically, evaluate different perspectives.
Form your own informed opinions.
Yeah. The UPSC isn't looking for robots.
Right. They want thinkers.
People who can engage with these complex issues
in a meaningful way.
That's what it's all about.
And that's what this deep dive is for.
Exactly.
To equip our listeners with the knowledge.
The tools they need to not only ace their exams,
right,
but to become informed, engaged citizens.
Who can contribute to making a better world.
That's a great way to put it.
We've talked about the need for reform, the different perspectives, the shifting global power.
The potential of new models.
But ultimately, the future of global economic governance.
Yeah.
It's not set in stone.
It's not predetermined.
It's something that we, as individuals and as a global community, can shape through our choices, our actions.
It's up to us.
And our engagement.
So stay informed, stay curious, stay engaged.
Don't be afraid of complexity.
Embrace it. Challenge your assumptions. Question the status quo.
Be open to new ideas.
Because who knows? Maybe one of you listening right now will come up with the next big idea.
For reforming global economic governance.
A system that's more stable, more equitable, more sustainable for everyone.
The future is not something that just happens to us.
It's something we create together.
So thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
Yeah, we hope you found it insightful and informative.
And maybe even a little inspiring.
And don't forget to like and subscribe to The Deep Dive.
For more deep dives into the topics that matter most.
Until next time.
See you then.